Chew. Oh, excuse me. I think that I might be a little bit sick. Are you sick too? I think that I have the disease of entrepreneurship. Do you? If you do, then this episode could exactly be for you. And if you don't, but it's a disease that you're really wanting to catch, this also could be the episode for you, because I'm talking with a multi-time entrepreneur who has built and sold 3 brand marketing and creative agencies, and he's currently working on his 4th with a really dope methodology that he talks about towards the end of our conversation here. And I ask him questions that like you always want to ask when people like really snootily say like, oh yeah, I am a entrepreneur and I sold these businesses. I ask him like, well, how much did you sell it for? And what would that look like? And tell me about all the other stuff that happened in between the selling, right? So we can get a really good idea of what it truly means to own and sell multiple businesses, the mindset that you need to be in, the stories that you're telling yourself and others, and how storytelling actually plays a huge component in the success of yourself, your business, and your brand. The guest that I'm talking about, his name is Damien Foord, and he is a brand innovation strategist. He's also an Air Force veteran and a creative entrepreneur that has advised hundreds of brands in Silicon Valley, including LinkedIn, Tesla, Adobe, and more. I like to name drop here. I don't know if you could tell, but like, my guests are pretty dope. And he's another one of the dope ones. He's also an experienced strategist at the intersection of brand and innovation, has exited multiple professional service ventures, and speaks on organizational identity and human-centered innovation. If you wanted to ever know how the heck people do more than one business because you are struggling to figure out the first one, or if you're just really wanting to do one, how you can do it really, really well and not make some of those same mistakes because you have caught the disease of entrepreneurship and you're really liking how it feels, then my friend, my dear listener, my darling listener, this episode is for you. All right, let's go.
Welcome to the Flourishing Entrepreneur Podcast with Alea Harris. If you're looking for actionable ways to overcome communication and differentiation challenges by sharing radically authentic stories, you are in the right place. Listen in and learn how to stand in the power of your unique narrative to transform your personal life, business, and workplace culture. And now, your host, award-winning international speaker, strategic storytelling consultant, and Japanese whiskey lover, Ruby Coral's mom, Alea Harris.
Damien, thank you so much for joining us here on the Flourishing Entrepreneur Podcast. How you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me. Excited to have this conversation today.
And I'm excited to have you. But before we dive into all of our hard-hitting, very thought-provoking questions, why don't you, in like 2 to 3 sentences, let the people know who you are and what you do?
Yeah, anybody who knows me laughed as soon as you said 2 to 3 sentences. But I'll do my best. Basically, I'm an Air Force veteran and entrepreneur. I've started and sold multiple businesses. I'm currently on my 4th creative firm. And it's a brand strategy firm focused on integrating skills I learned from the Air Force and cutting edge cognitive science to superpower storytelling and brand strategy.
So much to talk about from those simple sentences. First, I want to dive into the serial entrepreneur nature of your story, because I feel like a lot of my listeners are entrepreneurs. Some are not, but some are. They maybe have started 1 or 2 businesses, but the majority of them are struggling with one. And if they're like me, at least, even I'm just like, so what does it really mean to start multiple businesses? Did you start and we're going to get real honest. Did you start, did you fail? You said you started and you sold. Did you sell for like $1?
Yes.
Like, and then how then do you have the mentality to do it so quickly? What stories are you telling yourself to be able to do all of that?
I love it. Those are like the three right questions in my opinion. So I started many businesses that were just like selling stuff out the back of my car or whatever when I was younger. And I don't know, it took me to a certain point when I had to, like, back in the day, there wasn't as many online tools as there are now. So I had to like literally print out the tax code and read it and be like, what is actually starting a business, and learning to do that above board. And that was, around probably 2005 when I first started my first like official business registered with the IRS.
First step, don't be illegal.
Right.
Got it.
Well,
No,
I mean, that's another podcast.
Stuff
right?
out of the trunk of your car,
That's
so
right.
that could have been anything.
Yeah. That's a whole other podcast. Do what you got to do to survive. At a certain point, I recognized that there were people around the neighborhood who understood wholesaling and people who didn't. And so I got a really great deal on printing t-shirts, had printed up really relevant slogans, and then I would sell them wholesale to people who already understood wholesale deals. And so that was kind of my first business.
Elegant way of putting that I have ever heard.
Yeah,
that was hilarious. Yeah. Do continue.
And so the second question, really, like, when I sold businesses, did I sell them for like $1? Of all the questions I've been asked, in either at a conference or on a podcast, nobody's ever asked that question. And the truth is, one business was sold for $250,000, but it was in equity in the business that was formed through the acquisition. The short story of that is I got next to no money from that. The second one was for it was, I think, 150 in cash, 150K, and it was like 3 Bitcoin at the time, somewhere around that. Which now would be where nobody wants to know what I sold that Bitcoin for. I'll say it was below 1,000. So I wasn't a big believer in Bitcoin. I'm still not, to be honest with you. But my friends who are big believers love to point out how much money I would have had if I would have kept that. And then there's, I love the question because it brings up a great point that. People assume you sell a business and it's like millions of dollars, and usually it's not, and many times there's an acquisition and you're getting nothing for it, or it's just on equity and things like that are really common. The final one is, what are the stories I'm telling myself to keep going, or kind of what allows me to just, there's been lots of failures, right? So for those 4 businesses that I sold, there's, hundreds that are like, I started something, I got all my friends and family into the idea, and it went nowhere, and it turned out to be terrible. Most of the people, especially close to me, are more exhausted by my what David Rose calls the disease of entrepreneurship, which is like, I'm always coming up with an idea and trying to get other people to buy in and selling it to everyone around me, and a small percentage of them move past infancy. But that's really how I learn. I feel really blessed to have just be willing to fail a lot. It's not that it doesn't hurt, but obviously, like, I think cultural narratives play a big role in that. I think there's a lot of like, there's no hiding the fact that like white male privilege gives you like, oh yeah, go out there and fail, you're supposed to be successful. And I grew up with plenty of friends who are people of color that I recognize, like, oh, okay, there's not the same narrative driving what they're doing. That being said, I do think, I think there's a movie, Boiler Room. It's like real old, Giovanni Ribisi and Ben Affleck. And I think one of the great things they have in there is like regarding sales, they say act as if. And so, I tell my friends, like, act as if, or actually my wife came up with it, but she says, act as if, with all the confidence of a mediocre white man. And anybody can take control and do that. And just keep pushing forward, be willing to fail, and try again.
It's funny that you say that, because a a former client of mine who now her and her sister, they have the first wine bar in Inglewood. They've been on the Ellen show. They've done all this stuff and have multiple businesses each. They told me that exact same thing. They're both Black women, sisters. And they said, yeah, I said, how do you do that? And they're like, our father told us to enter in every single room with the confidence of a mediocre white man.
I love it.
And I'm just like, well, I can't knock it because you guys are clearly doing well with that mentality. And it is true. It is true. But I'm going to go back to several of the things that you said. One of them is you were talking about your friends and family are exhausted by your disease of entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a story that is probably fed back to you often, right? And so you're hearing it, you're living it, you're experiencing it. But in order to continue along with your beautiful sickness, you have to tell yourself a different story. What are those stories in reality? And then how do you have the two of them coexist so that you can continue forward?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with trusting who I am. And so a lot of like the work that I do centers around identity. And that ends up, kind of as a byproduct, I spend a lot of time getting to know what that means for myself. And ultimately, I think what ends up being that driving force for me is I spend very little time listening to the story that's playing on the surface and just following where do I feel driven. And I have to feel comfortable with like, I might be driven to be like homeless under an overpass, right? And if that ends up being where this takes me, what would make life worth living at that point? And generally, to be honest with you, it's having conversations like this. It's like getting to know people and digging deep and sharing in personal philosophy and connecting in that way. And so if I build my businesses around principles that whether I win or lose, I'm still going to be happy, then the win or lose doesn't become the end game. It's not the outcome that I'm after. There's a great quote with Kobe Bryant where he was asked, do you play to win or play not to lose? And he said neither, because the moment your mindset is in either one of those places, you're already distracted. He plays every game just to learn. And I try to, some days are better than others, right? And I definitely have not just some days here and there. I have lots of days where I'm like, I can't do this. I don't want to do this anymore. It's depressing. It's painful. I have all those days still, especially like when the evidence isn't clear yet with a new idea and other people aren't believing you yet. And it's like, it's so painful, but I just keep telling myself that it's not about winning or proving how smart I am or proving I really deserve to be an entrepreneur. It's just about learning what can I do to get better at my craft.
I appreciate you taking us out of the success and failure dichotomy and giving us a third option. I was experiencing this the other day because I've been doing lots of visualization. I have been really captivated by the teachings of Abraham Hicks and thinking about forward, like where we're going. And I'm like, well, if I'm visualizing myself, in my ideal state and I'm speaking at all these stages and doing all these things. But at a certain point in time, what's normal to me now, what normal feels like, will feel normal then too. So then why am I going to keep forward? What is motivating me? And I landed very similarly. My word was growth. Your word is learning. It's really the same concept, right? You're continually exploring new facets. And I don't want to negate the fact that I personally needed a modicum of success to have this conversation, right? Because when I first started reading Abraham Hicks and all this stuff, and you don't know my story, Damien, but my listeners do, so I'm going to just give a short recap. I was in postpartum depression. I was broke. And so I needed to feel my way even just a little bit out, get some more money, feel a little bit better. But it wasn't for months until I was even able to be in a financial position to start to even feel creative again and start to really think like, think outside of that dichotomy. So I really appreciate that you put that out there. And then I also want to give the listeners that are listening some grace if they're in the situation that they're like, yeah, sure. No success, no failure. There's this grandiose concept. You might not be there at this exact second, but you can get there because I've got there and Damien got there. Right. You got super excited when I said Abraham Hicks. Are you a reader of Abraham Hicks or a listener of Abraham Hicks as well?
So I open up a random Abraham Hicks 15-minute video, listen to it while I'm in the shower every single morning.
I'm on my way to yoga.
I love it. Yeah, my sister actually in 2019, she passed away from colon cancer, but she was like really big. She kept pushing me to listen to Abraham Hicks, and I was like, oh my, Celine, I'm not into that. It's not my thing. It's like, I don't know if I believe in that type of thing, whatever. And she would like just drill into me. Like, it doesn't matter if you believe, like just listen to it and see how do you feel. Right? Like, get out of your head and judging whether it's true or false or right or wrong, and just listen to it and see what it does. And it wasn't until, close to the end of her journey that I like really just kicked in. And I think it was part of being close to her, started listening to it all the time. And I noticed like, yeah, it doesn't matter whether I agree with it or not, or believe in it or not, or if I'm like intellectualizing, oh, I think whatever, right? It's just a matter of like, it puts me in a headspace where I'm like so positive, so energized, tapped in, tuned in, and turned on, and just ready to take on life. And I like being in that space. And so I tell people, find whatever's going to get you there. Abraham Hicks gets me there every morning. And what I've learned through it is that if it doesn't get you there, don't use it, but you better find something. Find something that can get you in that mode and just get you off the doom spiral of like, I can't do this, I'm failing again, I'm letting people down. Just so people know, I grew up super poor, homeless at times. Obviously, if I'm selling stuff out of the trunk of my car, it was, well, I guess some people do, but I grew up in a very difficult circumstances, youngest of 8 kids. My mom was mentally ill. I've got a 16-year-old son now and a 4-month-old son. And a family to support and provide for, right? So it's definitely not, and my story, like, yeah, everybody loves to tell the story, like, I worked hard and then I succeeded and it was happily ever after. It wasn't that. Like, I could tell you how I reinvested my money really poorly. One of my mentors, David Roberts, loves to say, the lesson about, making money and keeping money are 2 very different lessons to learn. And so I've made plenty of money and lost plenty too. So
the money just goes.
That's right. Yeah.
Goes. With ease it goes.
Oh yeah. And I used to be one of those people that was so bitter and judged other people and was like, if I ever had money like that one time, you know what I could do? And then I had it and I blew it, lost it just as fast. It was like, oh man, okay, humbling. A little humble pie.
You got it. Yeah. So I'm curious though. So looping back, you mentioned that your current business uses science-based techniques. And then at the same time, you are participating in an ideology, which a lot of people would call woo even.
Yeah.
So how do those live together?
Yeah. So, I mean, the scientific, I'm huge about like kind of live my life around the scientific method. I could, speak volumes into, how it plays a role in my life and ways that I've used it in really, really interesting research programs or things with large companies. And at the core is just, what is the minimum amount of evidence I need in order to make the next best decision? And Abraham Hicks.
Say it again. That was good. I'm sorry, dear listener. If you're jogging, you're driving, take a beat, tune back in, come back to us. Damien, say it one more time.
At the core of the scientific method is really the question of what is the minimum amount of evidence I need in order to make the next best decision.
So I need to know everything about the entire journey right at this exact second. Oh, wow, that's so fascinating. Do tell me more.
And so, for me, and it was actually a huge growth moment that once I finally kind of surrendered to my sister's advice and listened to Abraham Hicks, I didn't need to know, like, is this scientifically valid in like a peer-reviewed sense? It's scientifically valid for me because the evidence, I ran the experiment. I just listened to it, and then how do I behave that day? And if I'm tracking my own personal results, the evidence is there present in my life, right? And so then it's like, if somebody wanted to get like debate me about like, oh, well, do you think this is real or that? Like, I don't know anything. I don't know. All I know is what works for me in my life, and I'm rapidly iterating on testing those things. So that's another way to frame all that failure, right? It's like the more I'm looking at it as I'm identifying with the thing I'm trying to put out, then the failure feels like death, right? If I'm identified with it, then failure is death, right? And that's what makes it so scary. I'm not identified with my projects anymore, and I've got like 5 different ones running right now. Sometimes I feel like I'm crazy. Some people are like, wow, that's so impressive. And some people are like, with 5 is too many, and none of them look like they're, on the national stage. And so maybe you should focus in. And I just know it's right for me to do all of these. And so I'm just doing my thing, and I'm following and I'm listening and getting better and better every day. Like, more than I try to get better at business every day, I try to get better at listening to myself. What is like the true, voice that's inside of me, and what's the BS fear machine that I'm just getting better and better at ignoring.
Wow. So I was on mute, but I was having my hallelujah moment over here on mute while you were talking because you are right. If failure feels like death, and basically most of our lives, if we really look at it, are how do we avoid death? How do we avoid death? How do we avoid dying? How do we avoid being hurt? Then we will also avoid failure, which means we also avoid growth, which means we also avoid often stepping into our highest level of purpose for ourselves and telling a different story, because we could fail. We could die.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are reframing failure and taking away that death element, imagine how much bolder people could be, and how many amazing things they could create, and how much more potential they could step into if they just adopted that thought process. That's amazing to me.
And there's 2 things that happen, right? There's a certain freedom that you gain for yourself, but there's also an interesting perspective then you have on others, because like it's kind of like, for like a way overused and really abused metaphor now, it's kind of like stepping outside of the matrix. Once you're able to like step to the side of your own fear of like, well, what if I do this and this represents me, and that means I die, or that means I'm disconnected from community because people think I'm an idiot, and all those things. Once you step aside from that, and it's like, oh, I'm just going to do this. And maybe this means I end up lonely and living under a bridge, like I said, but I'm just going to, I know that this is my truth, and I'm just going to live it. Once you're at that point, then not only do you get the freedom to just operate for yourself, but you also look at everybody else and their motivations to avoid death and to avoid disconnection becomes so clear. Because here's the thing, right? If we just take as a given in the conversation that most of our motivation is towards avoiding death, and I'll say even to the point of like forgetting death, right? Not having to think about it, whichever side of that you look at. For as long as human history, I think one of the biggest myths that humans live under is that like people make it on their own. This like John Wayne or Batman is like an extension of this John Wayne myth. That's why they share the same last name, right? It's this idea of like,
knew that.
They're actually both based on a previous myth of like a Revolutionary War general, but with the same last name. Yeah. So the idea is like you can make it on your own. This like brooding loner. That's not the truth of humanity. It never has been. And so, ever since the moment we settled into villages like 12,000 years ago, it's not the strongest or the fastest that survives, but the most connected. And so somebody like me doesn't take down the saber-toothed tiger, right? I'm utterly dependent on the village for us all to work together to kill that thing together, right? And so here's the thing. If I can't kill that saber-toothed tiger on my own, then disconnection from the community feels the same as an axe at my head, right? And so then it's the two things are basically motivating everything that we do. It's avoiding death or having to think about death. By proxy, then it's avoiding disconnection from community, which is also like Brene Brown. That's her definition of shame, is the fear of disconnection. And so then, especially if you're an entrepreneur, and this is a lot of the work that we do, is helping people understand how to position your product, service, your business in other people's lives as the thing that's kind of making that more palatable or comfortable, or helping them live into their own truth, so that death and disconnection is less scary.
It's almost like you took my segue from me, because we're coming to the end of this interview, and I was literally about to ask you how you apply these principles to the business and the clients that you work with. So tell me a little bit more about that, and maybe give some tangible tips to our dear listeners, all about how they can do that so that they are helping people in a way that makes sense, given this relationship to death and disconnection, shame, etc.
Yeah, so rapid fire, there's 3 ways to think about brand, right? It's identification, like a logo, a name, something like that. That's the simplest and the earliest form of it. The second came around post-World War II with the golden age of advertising, and that's shaping perception. So creating a good mask for other people to see. But we understand in our own humanity that the masks we wear only weigh us down. And so the third way of looking at brand is identity. And if you want and this is the most powerful form of brand. Look at Apple, look at Nike. They're not creating a perception. They're creating an identity for you to live into. And if you want your business to be truly successful, you want people to pay more, buy more often, stay loyal like people do with Apple and Nike, then create an identity for your business that's as complex and intersectional as your own. And that's what we help people do, is we really understand the science of identity. So there's 3 portions that make a brand important. It's first, it's the data that you're collecting. Second, how you make sense of that data. And then third, how you apply it to the market. And so what we did is we used military intelligence techniques that I learned while I was in the Air Force to collect far better data. And so the thing that you're starting with is like the purest level you can get to, a real pure level of authenticity of that story. Then we use cutting edge cognitive science to run a higher level of analysis than most people are giving it. And then we work with different innovators in the field to then apply that to innovative business practices, to know the best way to take this really true authenticity that we're using intelligence collection to understand, then shining that through this prism of cognitive science, and then applying that in the most innovative way possible.
Well, I want to work with you, and I don't even really need a brand developed at this current juncture in time, but I'm just so jazzed about that I'm like, well, but I could. We could.
That's right.
Brand, let me go come up with one. I just want to work with Damien. So if people feel like me right now, they're just like, take all of my money, how can they reach out to you for you to help them build a brand that helps create and shape and is surrounded by identity?
So you can reach out to us at info@prismonde.com, PRISMONDE. .com. But also find me on LinkedIn. I'm really open. Even, people have ranges of budgets. I just like helping people. I like having this conversation. Whether I'm a successful entrepreneur, I'm living under a bridge, I'm going to keep having these conversations. So find me on LinkedIn, reach out, and I'd love to hear your story and give you some feedback.
Well, I already found you, so we gonna be talking about all
That's
the
right.
stories, all the things. I'm so glad this episode was awesome and is awesome. So I really am grateful for you for showing up, giving us your wisdom, being a little bit vulnerable, and helping us have better understandings of why we do the things that we do, and that it's okay sometimes to be a little bit sick with that entrepreneur disease.
That's right.
Keep moving forward. Thank you so much, Damien. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
I am so happy with that I am afflicted with the disease of entrepreneurship and that people like Damien are as well, because I feel so much better now after having had this conversation with him. We talked about everything that I thought we would talk about, like his company and his amazing methodology and what it's like to buy and sell businesses. But then we got into some other pretty cool stuff like death and how our relation to death shapes how we buy products and services and shapes how we should be marketing them, and how the scientific method and all of our woo-ness are actually compatible, and how to give ourselves other options that are not just binary, the dichotomy of success and failure. There's learning, there's growth, there's other experiences that we can intentionally choose to have. Because, dear listener, as you know, you are a powerful creator. You are the creator of your own experience. So take a look at the stories that you're hearing. Take a look at the stories that you're telling. Take a look at the stories that are available to you, which is any story that you could create. And go out and create one that feels good. That feels good. All right, well, this is the end of this episode. My name is Alea Harris. This is the Flourishing Entrepreneur Podcast. And like every episode, and like every day, every moment, with every breath, I am sending you, my dear listener, love, light, and abundance. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Flourishing Entrepreneur Podcast with Alea Harris. Vibing with what you hear? Leave a 5-star review to spread the love, and be sure to click subscribe. We wish you love, light, and abundance. See you next time.